Welcome back to Just Liberty, where justice and liberty meet. I'm Alan Reinach, president of the Church State Council, and I'm here with my co host, Bettina Krause, editor of Liberty Magazine, and together we're trying to take back liberty from the political extremes. Now, this is part two of a discussion about immigration policy and challenges that Christians and churches are facing given the changes in policy. But I want to be clear from the outset, it's not our purpose to take a political stance for or against a particular policy. We're we're trying to discuss the implications of the policies and provide some, I would say, public service information, rather than, commit this program or this church to a particular, political point of view. Is that fair, Bettina?
Absolutely, of course. Although, as Christians and as people who have a particular view of human dignity and humanity, we do bring a unique understanding, I think, to how we treat other people. Everyone is a brother and sister, regardless of who they are and regardless of their immigration status. But you're absolutely right, Ellen. We're not taking or commenting on political or partisan issues.
Well, so with that disclaimer, our guests again, back for more punishment. Jason Mustard, an immigration lawyer in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Stephen Allred, my partner in crime, so to speak, uh, serving with legislative duties for the Church State Council.
So we got this discussion off to a good start last week, and we were talking about the change in environment and the fact that now churches, schools, other places, hospitals that were once considered sensitive locations are now seen as open to potential law enforcement activity enforcing immigration laws. And so people are on edge, and with good reason, regardless of their immigration status. And so, what we're wanting to do is to provide individuals who have concerns either about their own immigration status or their families with some pretty solid advice on how they can respond in specific situations. So, Jason, why don't we start with you? Um, let me paint a scenario. Um, I have an immigration status that is not solid, and I'm stopped by the police because I'm driving 5 miles over the speed limit. How do I respond in a situation like that?
Well, first of all, um, whether or not you have something to fear from a traffic stop depends largely on the location where you're being stopped, right? So in California, which is a sanctuary state, what those policies essentially mean is that a local traffic stop or a traffic stop by, most local sheriffs, some California sheriffs see this differently. But generally speaking, that is not going to lead to any kind of referral to ICE. So I think a traffic stop in Tennessee, for example, or Texas could have very different implications than a traffic stop, say in California or Washington State. That being said, what I always tell my clients is obviously you want to be sure that you're fully aware of your rights, including your right to remain silent, including your rights in regards to search and seizure, and there is a whole huge body of case law involved with what exactly you have the right to say no to and what you don't have the right to say no to. But for a traffic stop, generally speaking, you're going to be asked to provide, your driver's license and proof of insurance, right? Um, and so, that you don't really have a choice in whether or not you turn those things over. So, of course, one of the most common types um, of citations that folks in the immigrant community get is driving without a license. And of course, that can be a misdemeanor violation. So, I know this scenario when you mention it, it seems very run of the mill and standard, but actually, depending on your immigration status, it could have implications that are fairly far reaching. So, the you mentioned that they have an uncertain immigration status. Well, that can mean a lot of different things. So, does that mean they overstayed a visa and now they are accruing unlawful presence because they don't have a visa status anymore? Does that mean that they don't have a visa status yet, but they've applied for something and that application is pending? Or does it mean that they're just here and undocumented? Um, so,
So, Jason, I have a really basic question.
yeah.
You know, in terms of how this all works. So, um, I mean, for the most part, none of us are carrying documents on our person that shows our citizenship or our immigration status, right? Um, for me, I have a driver's license and, whatever credit cards that, I carry in my wallet. But if I were stopped by a policeman and he asked me, or an immigration enforcement person and asked me, can you prove that you're an American citizen or that you belong here? I have no idea how I would do that. And I guess my question is, how does immigration enforcement go about figuring out if somebody belongs here or is here, is subject to deportation or enforcement activities because their status um, is not okay?
Well, that
I mean,
yeah.
is it all based on self-incrimination, or how does that work?
So I think that's a great question. And I would start by saying that if you are a legal permanent resident or any other kind of visa holder, you are actually supposed to carry evidence of your visa status or your residency with you all the time. Whereas, obviously as US citizens, there is no requirement, right? For us to carry our passport around or our birth certificate around. I will tell you that in my own family, I have family members who are naturalized US citizens. I won't say who. But in the current climate, they carry their US passport with them because even though they are a citizen, they know that they you know, that because they are in a minority that they feel like they could be targeted. That's their feeling. And so they do carry that proof of citizenship with them. I would say also that, ICE typically, when if they believe someone might not be a US citizen, they will ask them what their immigration status is. It is actually a huge problem if someone makes a false claim of U.S. citizenship. It's grounds for removal. It's grounds for denying them that person almost any kind of immigration relief in the future. It is like it's the cardinal sin for immigration purposes. There's no waiver for it really. It's one of the most difficult things to overcome. And so I, you know, I've never been along for an ICE raid or an ICE arrest, but I would imagine that, they are obviously aware of that. So if they ask someone, "Are you a US citizen?" and that person says yes, and then they for whatever reason don't believe them, and they detain them and say, "Well, we're not sure you're telling the truth. We want to see evidence of that." And it turns out they're not, that they made a false claim of US citizenship, then that could put the person in a lot of trouble. And I will tell you, most immigrants are well aware of this fact. Um, uh, you know, Notwithstanding their level of sophistication or education, most immigrants are well aware that if you make a false claim of U.S. citizenship or an immigration benefit of any kind, and in some cases, the approach is if you make a false claim of U.S. citizenship to the government for any kind of benefit, that can have severe immigration consequences. So, um, Yeah, to answer your question, like most people do carry, you're supposed to carry evidence of your visa status, of your immigration status. So if you are on a student visa, you should carry a copy of your I-20. If you have applied for, say for example, someone married a U.S. citizen, they came on a student visa years ago, and now that their spouse is sponsoring them to get a green card, which is completely it's fine in within the framework of the law. So even if they've been here undocumented for several years, now they have a process, and they once you apply, you are in a status as applying as someone who's applying for a green card as the immediate relative of a U.S. citizen. And so what we tell our clients is, well, you need to carry copies of your receipt notices. You have to have documentation evidence that shows you have a process in the works, right? Um, and that's true of anybody here in any kind of visa status, or really anyone with an application that's pending. Um, Obviously, there's a lot of nuances with that, but
Uh-huh.
you really do need to carry documentation. U.S. citizens, it's different, and of course, if a U.S. citizen is detained and ultimately removed, which has happened, obviously they have a lot of recourse, right? They are There's a lot of avenues for relief for them. They're going to be able to get back to the U.S. and they probably have potential litigation that they can look at because their rights may have been violated somewhere along the way. Um, so I would say it's really rare for a U.S. citizen to be detained by immigration. It does happen, and it may be that they someone might have to just they may have to have a family members or whoever help them get the documentation they need. Um, but for in general, I don't think U.S. citizens need to worry about it as much. Of course, if you are living within 100 miles of the U.S. border, there's a much higher chance you're going to have interactions with Customs and Border Patrol enforcement, and these questions might be asked of you that much more often. And there are some different rules that apply when you're close to the border. But yeah, I mean, the question about what do I carry with me, what documentation, that is the first thing we tell all of our clients is to make sure you are carrying that with you all the time. And because you may be in a situation where you have to show that you have status, or that you are in the process of getting your status, figured out.
So, Jason, as someone who held a green card for 20 years, I can certainly attest to the fact that you need to keep that green card on you at all times, especially when you're trying to cross back into the United States after traveling abroad. It's a long story, but it wasn't pleasant. So, documentation, even for those who have documentation, is important to keep that on you at all times. But Steve, I'm wondering, what happens um, if if immigration enforcement comes to your workplace, or what happens if they come to your home? I guess there's this common feeling, and I don't know a lot about immigration law, I have to say, but there's a sense that if you don't have status, you don't have rights. But do you have some rights? I mean, how does that work?
Absolutely. And I think that is probably something that a lot of Americans don't maybe understand is this idea that even non-citizens on American soil are still covered by certain protections under our Constitution, right? I mean, the 14th Amendment is a good example of, a right that everyone has, all persons, right? They have this right to due process of law. And of course, the Fourth Amendment, which, is that prevents against unlawful searches and seizures, um, or unreasonable searches and seizures, right? So those are protections that apply even to folks who don't have immigration status, right? And so, yeah, what if they come to your home or your place of work? And I think there are a few general things. By the way, great resources out there from some third parties. Let me just actually see one, and Jason mentioned some in our previous episode. I know the National Immigration Law Center, NILC.org, has some great kind of know your rights, one-page sheets you can download, print off, has summaries of all of what we're talking about and even more. And we're not endorsing them, but great resources there. I think first thing, hey, if immigration enforcement comes to your house, you don't have to open the door. Um, unless, they have a valid search warrant signed by a state or federal magistrate or judge. And, some organizations, and Jason could speak more to this, I'm sure, that pointed out that an ICE uh, warrant signed by an ICE officer is not the same as a search warrant. Um, and if the warrant doesn't have your correct name and address and is not signed by a judge, you don't have to open the door and let them inside.
So
You
can I
can
just
talk.
jump in here? For
Sure.
someone who's under stress, someone
Yeah.
who is fearful and anxious, I mean, I would find it very hard in that situation to hold all these details straight. And to unless you've had special training in doing that, in knowing where to look on that piece of paper for that information. So is it practical for someone to to try to search out specific bits of information?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, and this is, of course, best scenario would be that you have a immigration lawyer on speed dial, and
Yes,
you
right.
can get their opinion. But yeah, I think these are the best practices, but do they always happen? I mean, we've all been, I'm assuming, pulled over for speeding or something like that. We've had civil infractions, and by the way, most immigration um, issues are civil infractions, right? There are some criminal issues, but a lot of the things we're talking about here, to be undocumented is not a crime, usually. I think unless you've re-entered or something, right? But it's generally a civil infraction. So yeah, we've gotten pulled over, and you're nervous. You're not thinking clearly, and so I get it. And I think that's why, again, like we mentioned in our previous episode, to have a plan ahead of time does help a little bit. I think to think ahead, to read through these Know Your Rights sheets that you can find out there online can be helpful. But I think, yeah, no, you don't have to open the door. Now, if they're coming there and they've, you know, you're a criminal and they're looking for you, they're going to break your door down. They're going to get in there, right? If they do present you with a lawful warrant signed by a judge, yeah, you are supposed to let them in. You do have the right to remain silent again, and this is, I
Well,
think, an important
Stephen,
thing.
I
And
would I would also mention that, what we've always told folks is that, usually a warrant is only going to name one person, right? So if they come to your home, they're
really
looking
good.
for a specific person. If the warrant is legal and executed, has somebody's name and everything looks correct, and then that one person should then step outside and make sure to close the door behind them. And the reason for that is you really don't want to just invite them into the home, especially, because the enforcement priority now is different. They're not just looking for people with criminal records. The enforcement priority is anyone who does not have a current status in the US is a as an enforcement priority, which means that when ICE comes to your neighborhood or they come to your home, if they have the opportunity to question other people in your home or in your in your neighborhood, if they're looking for one guy but
Right.
they see other folks in the neighborhood, they'll question everybody and round up whoever they feel like may not be
Mhm.
documented. And so if they show up at your home, you can have them show the warrant through the window or maybe slide it under the door so you can review it. And then if it is properly executed, if it's signed by a judge and it's got the specific name, if that person's not there, you can say that person's not here, if that's the honest truth. And and they don't have the right to enter at that point. If that person is there, and everything is executed in a legal way, then that person should step outside, and that should, to limit the scope of that enforcement action, right?
And I think it's important to, add, as Jason mentioned earlier, don't lie, don't tell them something that's not true. Don't show false documents either. I think that's another piece of advice
Yes.
that is a good practice. If you are detained and taken into custody, you have a right to speak to a lawyer. Even if you don't have a lawyer, you may tell the immigration folks that you want to speak to one. I believe there's a form as well that some lawyers provide their clients. I think it's Form G28, right, which shows that you have a lawyer. You can give that to an officer. There are pro bono lawyers out there as well that you can ask for a list of. And my understanding is you can also, if you are not a citizen and you're taken into custody, you have the right to contact your consulate, and they may be able to help you find a lawyer. The other thing that Jason also mentioned earlier, which is I think really important, is don't sign anything until you've had an opportunity to speak to your lawyer. And if you choose to sign something without talking to your lawyer, make sure you know what you're signing, because I think that can get people in a lot of trouble. So those are a summary. And again, I would recommend, there are a lot of good websites out there with good information, including some know your rights cards that you can present if you don't want to speak to the immigration official. It just kind of shows them what you're trying to say without talking yourself. Good resources for people to look for.
And we will put links to those resources in the show notes if people want to access those.
Bettina, I would really like to kind of broaden the discussion if it's appropriate now, because I mean, there's so much divisiveness over this issue of immigration. And again, as we said at the outset, um, we're not here to take particular policy positions, but we are first and foremost Christians. And how we think about how um, those who are strangers and aliens, which is another, I mean, it's a biblical term, right, in Scripture, how we think about people who may be regarded as less than, I think raises very important biblical principles. And I think it behoove us to kind of wrap up this by maybe reflecting on that for a minute. Well, Steve, you're the I didn't introduce you as an ordained minister, but you're the minister here. Do you want to speak to this?
And attorney, which is an odd combination, I have to say.
It's an
But
oxymoron for sure.
pastor
Yeah,
and
right.
attorney.
I went to the dark side, they say. Well, here's the thing. I think that at a most basic level, we as Christians look at every other human being as being created in the image of God. So even if that person is a terrible criminal who is sitting on death row, they are created in God's image. Doesn't mean we condone what they're doing or have done, but it does mean that we care and we love our neighbor as ourself, which is, of course, the second of the two great commandments. Um, and so I think that that is an important foundation that we have to remember, is that no matter our skin color or ethnicity or nationality or immigration status or non-status, um, we're all human beings. Now, we can have our different opinions on what ought to happen to someone if they aren't following the law. But I think that we, at a broad level, need to have a certain level of compassion. And I think what helps me with that is when I look at my own life and realize I'm not perfect. That doesn't justify breaking the law, perhaps, but I've broken the law. I'm not going to say how or when, but it was probably in a motor vehicle going a little too fast.
Well, you
Uh,
just said "pow" anyway.
Perhaps, and so, and I think if we can kind of step back for a minute and say, wait a minute, how would I want to be treated in this situation? Why is this person, maybe this is getting a little too into this, but why is this person undocumented? It doesn't justify maybe, again, there's different ways to look at this, but oftentimes I think there's a shared humanity that we forget, and we begin to kind of put people into boxes,
Mhm.
and there's kind of a dehumanizing that can happen. And listen, the scripture is full of course, references to the alien and the stranger, and how God really prioritized that in ancient Israel. And of course, in the New Testament, Jesus talks about I was a stranger and you took me in. Interesting word. It's the word that applies to kind of the foreigner. How does that apply in a situation like this? I don't know that we can make that connection for everyone, but that to me is kind of a starting place.
Yeah, and I would encourage anyone listening. I would encourage just to remember from a very basic standpoint, that the way people talk about immigration today from either side of the aisle tends to be um, sort of overly simplistic, right? Immigration is you're talking about people from all kinds of backgrounds, from all kinds of places, and it really is a complex and diverse issue. It is made up of complex and diverse situations. Every single case that I deal with has a different set of facts, has a unique set of facts, and unique individuals who have different motivations and everything else for wanting to be here. Um, I very, very frequently work with people who they come to me and they have a particular stance about immigration and a viewpoint, but they want to help their neighbor, because the neighbor's one of the good ones, right? And
Uh-huh.
and and
Uh-huh.
um, and I would just encourage everyone when they are thinking about immigration and they're thinking about immigration in particular, how does their faith inform their views of immigration and this issue? It is a complex issue. It's not an easy issue. I mean, from the standpoint of the law, it's widely considered to be one of the most complex areas of the law, and along with bankruptcy law, those are considered to be the two. Immigration and bankruptcy are considered to be two of the most sort of statutory heavy and complex areas of the law because just of the nature because those are difficult subjects and at the end of the day, we are talking about human beings, and we're talking about people with families and kids. When we talk about asylum seekers, we're talking about people who are fleeing some of the most horrible, scary, and traumatic things that you could potentially imagine. And, you know, but we are also often talking about people who are chasing the American dream the same way that our ancestors did. And my family may have been here for hundreds of years, but at some point they were immigrants too, and that's personally what I always kind of come back to.
So, Jason, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing not only your legal expertise today, but also reminding us a little about Christianity 101, that we are, as followers of Christ, to see the image of the Creator God in every human being that we interact with. So, thank you so much for the work that you both do. Thank you for sharing it with us today, and hopefully, we'll have you back another time. I'm sure there will be issues enough to discuss in the coming months and years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Such a challenging conversation, Alan, because, as Jason and Steve reminded us, these are individuals, these are human beings. We're not just talking abstract
Right.
policy, we're talking about human beings. And as followers of Christ, we don't get a pass from being compassionate. That's part of our portfolio, right?
It is. And, I mean, I've been at this for a long time, and I have to say that uh, neither political party has really uh, we haven't had a solution. Um, Congress hasn't passed a major immigration reform since Ronald Reagan's presidency, where they had an amnesty program, right? Going back literally 4 decades ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think, there's broad consensus that we need changes and we need a better system. Of course, there's no consensus on how to do that.
And I think we'll see churches and other faith traditions, grappling with these questions going forward. I mean, it very much slips on the
Isn't it?
turf of a person of faith. So, we have a lot more to
Yeah.
explore on this.
Well, and the thing that bothers me is when the kind of the rhetoric and the propaganda um, sort of denies the common humanity,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
That we're not, we forget that this is not just, like us against them. We're talking about human beings and people who are created in God's image and that deserve to be treated with dignity and respect for whether they're going to stay or leave, right?
Yeah. And that's the bottom line, Alan. I couldn't agree more. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Bettina Krause here with Alan Reinach. And remember, eternal vigilance is a price of liberty.